Thanks to Ming for touching on those topics, just basically about how we came up with the idea of politics. It was kind of, I guess, originated from a place where we were discussing problems that faced us, and there were a vast number of topics, but politics was one which really stuck out to us as we felt that our own literacy on the subject was, not competent enough, and so we wanted to create a resource which would, help a bunch of people with that specific topic. So that's why we decided to come up. I guess at the beginning, our initial idea was just kind of, what if we just had a website? That was just our political website, which would help inform young people because everyone uses a computer nowadays. So we thought that was a good starting point. So to begin our research stage, which is our insights, what we decided to do was obviously come up with our own background research from a bunch of journal articles and articles as well. But also we wanted to conduct a vast range of interviews. So we decided to kind of broadly split it up into different user groups. So I looked at people who had no interest in politics at all, whilst Dylan he had the expert interview with someone who was quite proficient in politics, and Akshali and Ming looked at people who were kind of, I guess, half and half interested, but not really interested. So for the interviews, we came up with just a short questionnaire. However, we really stressed the importance of expanding on it. So some of the questions we asked were, obviously, are you interested in politics? Why not? Did you vote? How informed are you about politics? What is your source of information? Is it Facebook or Instagram, social media? Do you know what sources are unbiased and biased? What would you? And then we brought up obviously the example of our prototype. How would you feel about our website being available, which states political information in layman's terms and is very unbiased? And also the final question we asked was like, do you think it would help your understanding in politics? So that was kind of the questions we asked, and also we took a lot of tips from the activity workbook, I think, just especially regarding how to conduct an interview, because with this topic, it's very easy to seem almost like condescending and thinking that you're better than the interviewee, but we really wanted to stress beforehand with the person that we were interviewing that, our understanding of politics is also not that great, and that's why we're conducting this, to make a resource. So it was really important to us to empathize with the users. And as you can see in the PowerPoint, we've got two pictures of the setups. As you can see, we've got a few iPhones for recording, but mainly it was just like writing down key points, as we wanted to make it informal as possible, just to make the person we're interviewing very comfortable. I think Dylan, do you want to start off with the expert interview?
So I had the expert interview, and the person that I interviewed had a lot of knowledge about politics and was very politically literate, and they were in our key demographic, which was the young people between 18 and 24 in New Zealand. And so this was our expert. They knew what they were talking about, and the main top 5 findings that I got from the interview was mainly that they believe that it's very hard to find believable political information and reliable political information, as you have to go to a variety of sources such as websites and articles and everything like that. It's very hard to actually find one reliable source. And then once you do, they have very little information about the broader topics. They mainly just focus on one party, just like a party's political website, for example. There's a lot of reading to do, and they only focus on the one party themselves. It's very hard to find a conglomerate of information. Another findings was that they tend not to believe things on social media, as the information actually on social media tends to not be very real, and a lot of the fake news propaganda is very prominent on social media. Yeah. They also talked about a lot of frustrations that they had with other people who perhaps were not informed very well on politics, but because of the bias in the media and social media and everything, they tend to believe something that isn't actually true. So the expert that I interviewed was very kind of frustrated with this situation. And then also that they were talking about how the proposition that we brought up with the prototype of the website, they thought that was a very good idea and a good way to get people involved, and that someone who is very politically literate would use that website and they would use the service that we provide with our prototype. And what about you?
So obviously Akshali can't be here today because he just had eye surgery, so wishing him all the best. But he conducted his interviews were actually quite interesting with people who were interested in politics but found the information so boring that they didn't want to do anything about it. So some of the key insights from his interview specifically was that the young people did have an interest in politics. However, due to the lack of resources and the wealth of information, they decided to ignore it and just go on their lives, I guess. And also regarding the use of social media and politics that Dylan just brought up, Achala was mentioning that people who they knew that the news sources on social media were unbiased. However, since it was in a shorter format and accessible to them almost immediately, they would read it, and that's how they would get their news sources. Specifically for me, I interviewed people who did not care about politics at all, and some of the interesting insights I found were that they noticed that there was still a lot of bias in political news, even though they did not have any interest, because obviously, again, that point of accessibility, you are going to read whatever just scrolling down the social media feed. So they even said that there is a sense that the news has now become biased, and that may be due to what's happening in America right now, where there's a lot of political unrest and there's very evidentiary political news which are very biased. So clearly that's influenced their perception. Also, another key gem was that that there's a lot of it's hard to understand in the complex language, and that tends to deter people from reading politics because the information is so long and there's definitions and definitions after that of just multiple terms, and so that always deters them. And also, it's just very complex language, and it's just a wealth of information which is very hard to understand. I also brought up the same question that Dylan did to his interview, specifically regarding would they be interested in a website, and surprisingly, they said they would not look at my website because it was not accessible on social media. They said that they will not go out of their way to find a website because they do not care about politics, and also that they would not be interested in searching up a website. So I then, separate from the questionnaire, I decided, would you access the website if it was available maybe through social media? And they did say they would. So that was something interesting, and that's something that you'll see later on that we used when we created our prototype. But then also some of the background research I'll quickly touch on is that we looked at a few resources to see if there were links between our interviews and also the just research out there in the world. And one of the key findings we found from Common Sense was that around 54% of young people get their news from Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, while 50% get their news from YouTube. So I feel like we already had an understanding of this, but it was great to see that those linkages were found. Also, a great research paper recently done by White, Bruce, and Ritchie. The quotes right there, as you can see, the way in which politics was delivered, had left some with the impression that politics is dull, serious, and monotonous. And that was really evident with a lot of the interviews we got, that, the idea that politics is quite boring and the information is quite broad. And, that leads to that, their perceived difficulties in understanding the language because especially the jargon, it's just very confusing. And in that research paper, they touch on many of the similar issues that many people face. We took all that into consideration, the use of social media, the language, and that's what we wanted to develop in our prototype.
Yeah, so our prototype that we started off with after the insights from our interviews as well as the research was a political website that you could access through social media to cater more towards people who don't really care about politics, as well as just to help most young people who pretty much all use social media. So once you access the website, you would be able to look at political articles that talk about the current events, debates, anything to do with that, but you could also do a compatibility quiz. And this was a series of questions that would link you to a certain party based off your political views on certain issues. And this would help a lot of people kind of figure out where they actually lie politically, as a lot of them don't know where they are.
Give more insights really to their political situation. As you can see, there's just a few little snapshots of, we did kind of like a starting prototype, really, how the first picture is starting on Instagram. There's a link, they undertake the quiz, and that the rankings are the different compatibility results. And initially we just left it at the first quiz, but Dylan, it was your idea with the smaller quizzes.
So we had the idea that after maybe reading an article and getting more educated on a certain topic, for example, we were saying the capital gains tax. If you read an article where you learned about the capital gains tax, you can take a quiz at the end of it to show you where your opinions on it is, and that could link you to a certain party, and that can update you the results that you got from the compatibility quiz. And this means that as you become more educated and more informed about policies and have more political knowledge, the compatibility quiz will update alongside you.
Involved with you,
yeah,
because everyone's political views change, and I was going to talk about this earlier, but the idea that I feel at times we just support a party and then we just support them for multiple years without ever really reading into their policies as much. But with this test that Dylan came up with, a smaller quiz specifically, this evolves with you, so you can see how your views change as time progresses with this.
Yeah, so that was our original prototype, and then we began to thinking kind of more, how do we actually appeal to our target demographic, which is the young people, when we came up with the prototype for the advertisements.
It came from really one of the key insights we gathered, which was mainly from my interviews, which was that the users would not go out of the way to find this website, and it had to be linked somewhere in social media. So that's why we put up the question there, which was, how might we attract young people between the ages of 18 to 25 in New Zealand from social media towards unbiased and factual news sources, basically our website. So we thought, okay, we need to come up with advertisements. So as you can see, the one on the left is an example of a poster that Dylan made, which was kind of to describe how we posted around Vic Uni somewhere, just because it's always, posters are kind of an outdated form of advertising. However, in uni, they're very useful and people tend to read them quite a bit. And if you notice by the language and what Dylan has used, it's very short, asking rhetorical questions, a simple picture to show the goal, and also a QR code, because everyone now has, iPhones or tablets. And then the one on the right is an example of how it be shown on Instagram. Again, just short, snappy words which will attract the user, understand your future, be informed, and just a little snapshot of the compatibility quiz so they understand and maybe get a taste of what the website could offer.
Yeah, and we just thought this would be the best way to kind of grab the attentions of young people and really informing people. And the idea that if you increase the kind of political knowledge of younger people, then they'll grow up with that political knowledge in mind, and they will also kind of sow it down to the next generation as well, and kind of get them more politically informed.
Generations.
Exactly, and then that's the kind of idea that when someone is more politically informed, they'll tend to stay more politically informed as well.
100%,
yeah. And so if we can just increase the political knowledge of people just from nothing to something, that's always good. And the great thing about the prototype is the website and social media, it's always going to be there. It's not leaving, so that you'll constantly get the benefits of it every time you access it.
Politics isn't going to go away. It's going to be around forever, so the website is completely sustainable. But I think the main point is the smaller quizzes, really.
Yeah, where as you grow up and your political views change, the prototype changes with you. And the compatibility quiz, and mainly the results of it, showing you what parties you align with, that will update as well. And you'll always be informed about who you should vote for, how you should vote, and just where you lie on all the different topics that politics involves. And this is especially helpful considering, back to the interviews, just how people really just were confused about the language and confused about what context all these things were said in. Now they have a lot more political knowledge about it, and it's a very easy term to say, hey, you like this, you should vote this.
100%. I think also then when we talk about what's next, I think what we've shown today in our presentation is how we started off with the large idea, which was having a website, and then we've talked about the individual components to make it successful. Specifically, firstly the compatibility quiz, and then after that, even the advertisements to attract users to our website. So we've shown how if we can get all of these snapshots together, it will make a beautiful picture, I guess, at the end of the day. What's next for us specifically with the website, though, is one of the key things we have to figure out is how do we quantify results. Specifically, we had the idea of obviously once you've done a test, you get a certain, say for example, we do a quiz and you get 80% labour, 70% national, 30% Greens, for example. So we've got to figure out a way to quantify results. Maybe the number of questions, maybe each answer is related to a certain party, and then the number of questions that you answer with, that's a certain percentage. So that will be a way that we'll have to look at in the future. How do we quantify results? Also, just for the one of the key issues that Dylan just brought up actually is the idea that we need to keep the language simplistic, but we also need a further understanding. So that means the constant definitions of all political terms, because the jargon, as stated by the research paper before, it's really important that we constantly define those terms, and also just technical maintenance of the website so that it evolves over time. It's the UX design part is always evolving as technology continues to grow. And then also linking with the small quizzes is the constant production of content, because specifically the small quizzes is linked with that, isn't it?
They're just constantly producing a content, because as we mentioned before, politics never stops.
Yeah.
So if the website is going to be a continuous source, that means the continuous source of information needs to keep being produced and keep being pumped out for everyone.
Yeah, and specifically also with the different articles we have, we've got to keep having quizzes underneath. So that's why we need constant production of content. So there's more quizzes, and therefore the compatibility test can continue to get updated and evolve with the user. So that's our presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for listening.